My name is Evelyn Hart, and for most of my life, I was the footnote in someone else's story. The invisible daughter. The child with dreams deemed impractical, silly, and less important. I wasn't born into a family that celebrated imagination or ambition unless it was scripted in their narrow definition of success. In our household, excellence had only one face, my brother Nathan. He was the son we all revolved around. Tall, athletic, articulate in the way that adults found precocious rather than arrogant. My parents adored him. Our golden boy, they'd say with glowing pride at every school event, while I stood nearby, my honor roll certificates crinkling in my hand, waiting to be noticed. It wasn't that I lacked talent. I had a gift for seeing patterns in chaos, solving problems in ways others hadn't considered. I'd build intricate systems of organization for our house, design mock businesses for school projects, manage charity events with grace beyond my years. But to my parents, those were just hobbies, fluff, and noise compared to Nathan's path of sports scholarships and debate trophies. I remember one evening, sitting at the dinner table, cheeks flushed with excitement, detailing my idea for a tech startup I had been sketching out for weeks. I had written a business plan, researched market trends, even projected startup costs. My father didn't look up from his plate. My mother smiled, that clipped, polite smile she reserved for things she didn't respect but didn't want to seem cruel about. And then came the words that sealed it. "That's cute, Evelyn. But maybe focus on something real. Your brother's preparing for his law internship. Now that's worth talking about." I nodded and swallowed the lump in my throat with my salad. Nathan could do no wrong. Even when he crashed the family car drunk one summer, they found a way to twist the narrative. "He's under a lot of pressure," my father said, while my mother covered the repairs with her emergency savings and murmured, "He just needs support." When I accidentally missed curfew by 10 minutes one evening after tutoring a classmate, the house exploded with disapproval. Irresponsible, selfish, disrespectful. I stood there, my apology unheard, wondering what version of me they needed in order to love me out loud. I learned, slowly and painfully, that I would not be celebrated. Not unless I aligned myself with their expectations. But I also learned something else: how to endure in silence. How to build my strength not in their spotlight, but in the quiet corners of my own making. I went to a local university with little fanfare. They offered no congratulations, only passive-aggressive comments about how I hadn't aimed high enough. I majored in business administration, minored in computer science, and spent nights working part-time at a cafe to pay for my textbooks. Nathan, meanwhile, was on a full ride at Yale, with weekly care packages and glowing updates in the family group chat. But I didn't need the fanfare. I needed the fuel. And the way they dismissed me, oh, how that fueled me. By the time I was 26, I had launched my first company from my tiny apartment, using a borrowed laptop and an overworked coffee machine. It wasn't glamorous. I failed more than I succeeded in those early months. But every failure taught me something. Every small win made me believe a little harder. I kept my distance from home. Visits became less frequent and calls more strained. My parents assumed I was still finding myself. Nathan was now a junior partner at a prestigious law firm, bringing dates to Christmas dinners and stories of court victories that made my parents beam. I sat beside the punch bowl, listening and learning. They didn't know that while Nathan was arguing cases, I was negotiating contracts with investors. That my second company was gaining traction in the AI space. That I'd been quietly listed in Forbes 30 Under 30 in the tech category under a company name they wouldn't recognize because I hadn't told them. Why would I? To them, I was still Evelyn, the dreamer who never quite measured up. Until the day the phone rang. It was from Halverson Enterprises, the Fortune 500 company where Nathan's law firm was about to close a multi-million-dollar deal. The CEO was stepping down, and after months of vetting, interviews, and anonymous recommendations from respected figures in the industry, they had selected their successor. Me. I let the silence fill the space between my breath and my memory of that dinner table, The one where my ideas were cute and not real. I didn't tell my parents right away. I waited. I waited for the annual family holiday gathering. Everyone would be there. My aunts, uncles, cousins, Nathan, of course, with his newest girlfriend and stories polished to perfection. And then, in a moment that felt lifted from a novel I never dared to write, I stepped into that room, the weight of my announcement neatly folded inside a leather portfolio. I smiled as I saw their faces, comfortable, smug in their belief that they knew who I was. But they didn't know the fire they'd sparked. They were about to. The air in the room crackled with the familiar energy of my family's holiday gatherings, an odd blend of subtle tension and performative cheer. Laughter rang out in waves, but it was always just a decibel too high, too forced, like everyone was auditioning for the role of most successful relative. I arrived fashionably late, as they say. But for me, it wasn't about fashion, it was about strategy. The moment I walked in, the room paused, not because they recognized anything different about me, but because they didn't expect me to stand tall. I wasn't the meek shadow trailing behind Nathan anymore. I wasn't the girl blending into beige cardigans and safe smiles. I wore confidence like a tailored coat that night, sleek, dark, and undeniable. Evelyn, my mother called, her voice tinged with that fragile surprise reserved for those one doesn't expect much from. I leaned in and kissed her cheek. "Hi, Mom. Happy holidays." Nathan approached, arms wide, grinning that same polished grin that had won him debate trophies and parental worship. "You made it," he said, as if I'd just wandered in off a sidewalk by mistake. "I did. Wouldn't miss it," I replied. He looked the same, sharp suit, Rolex glinting beneath his cuff, the latest model girlfriend in tow. She gave me a polite nod and promptly turned to check her reflection in the mirror by the fireplace. The chatter resumed. Conversations whirled around degrees and dividends, medical breakthroughs, and law firm mergers. My name didn't come up. It never did. But I'd come prepared. I waited until dessert, when the wine had softened their edges and the room felt warm with self-congratulations. My father was recounting Nathan's recent courtroom victory, and my mother clutched her pearls in delighted agreement. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass to quiet the room. I let the pause settle like dust before I stood. "I have something to share." All heads turned, some with polite curiosity, others with thinly veiled impatience. I unfolded the letter, thick, cream-colored stock embossed with the Halverson Enterprises seal. I didn't need it to validate my story. But symbolism matters in families like mine. Proof matters. As of January 3rd, I will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer at Halverson Enterprises. There was silence. Not the silence of disinterest or distraction. Stunned. Utter silence. Then came the shifting glances, the whispered repeats of the title. And finally, my father's voice, hoarse, as if pulled from the depths of disbelief. "CEO?" I nodded, letting the word linger in the space between us like a final puzzle piece sliding into place. "They reached out months ago. I went through 6 rounds of interviews. Global vetting. I was recommended by several people your law firm negotiated with last year, Nathan." He blinked. Once. Twice. I saw his jaw twitch, his mind doing the math, trying to fit this version of me into the story he thought he knew. My mother's hand gripped her wine glass tightly. "But you, how?" "I mean, we didn't know you were qualified." I looked her in the eyes, not unkindly, but without apology. "That's the thing, Mom. You never asked." I let the words fall like snow on a windshield, quiet, cold, and clearing. Aunt Gloria muttered something about being proud, but even her voice sounded unsure, as though checking first if it was okay to celebrate me now. Nathan laughed, a forced chuckle, masking his confusion with charm. "Well, looks like you've finally made something of yourself." I smiled. "I did. While you were being applauded, I was building. Quietly. Consistently." My father cleared his throat. "And what exactly does this company do?" I turned toward the room, letting my voice fill it like light flooding a hallway. We develop integrated AI and automation systems for enterprise-level operations. We streamline global logistics, cybersecurity, and scalable infrastructures for Fortune 100 clients. And we've just secured a $400 million government contract. Another silence followed, this one different. Heavier. I sat back down and sipped my wine. But don't worry, I added with a faint smile, I won't let it get in the way of more important things like making it to family dinner on time. It was my mother who broke the silence this time, not with words, but with tears. Not weeping, but those glassy, stunned drops that betray the truth people try to swallow. They weren't just shocked. They were speechless. And for once, I was the one who didn't need their approval. I had my own. The aftermath of my announcement rippled through that family room like a sudden storm over a still lake. The same people who once skimmed past me at reunions now circled slowly, cautiously, like deer unsure if they were welcome at the edge of a clearing. I excused myself to the hallway for air, pretending to check my phone. My fingers shook slightly, not from nerves, but from the seismic shift I felt inside me. A woman can spend her whole life whispering her worth into locked rooms, praying someone will open the door. But tonight, I had kicked the door in. And they had nothing to say. I glanced back toward the room. My mother was talking with Aunt Gloria, her hands ringing in a way I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral. Nathan stood stiffly beside the fireplace, his smile cracked at the edges, his girlfriend whispering something in his ear that made him clench his jaw. When I turned back, my father was there. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. It had always come at me like thunder, full of certainty and finality. But now it cracked at the edges. "I didn't know." I nodded. "You didn't want to." He winced, and I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost. You always seemed so content with small things," he added, like he was still trying to reconcile the version of me that folded napkins at dinner with the one who now signed international contracts. "I wasn't content," I said. "I was quiet." "That's not the same." We stood there a moment. Father and daughter, but strangers now in the ways that mattered. He stared at the floor like it held answers. I remembered all the times I'd brought home dreams like fragile glass figurines, only to watch them dismissed, discounted, discarded. "It's not that we didn't care," he finally said. "I know," I replied. "You just didn't believe I could be more than what you imagined." He swallowed, and I watched the words he wanted to say wither behind his lips. There would be no apology tonight. Maybe not ever. But he knew. And that was enough for now. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal blur. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years approached with hollow praise. My Aunt Lillian clutched my hand, saying, "You always were such a hard worker. I knew you'd find your moment." She hadn't, of course. She'd once told my mother I was probably destined for a nice little office job with a steady paycheck and a cat. But let them rewrite their memories if it helps them sleep. I didn't need their retrospective belief. I had the real thing. As the night wound down, Nathan finally approached me. His girlfriend was gone, likely fled from the sudden imbalance of the evening. "So," he said, hands in his pockets. "CO, huh?" I nodded. "Yep." He laughed once, short and flat. "You really kept that under wraps." "Didn't think you'd be interested," I said coolly. He looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing a person he'd walked past on the same street every day but never noticed until now. "I guess I underestimated you." I tilted my head. "No, Nathan. You never took the time to estimate me at all." That silenced him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a man who lived off arguments, off clever rebuttals and practice lines, my quiet had become the loudest thing in the room. Later that night, I drove home alone, the city lights spilling like gold across the windshield. I turned off the radio and let the silence sit beside me like an old friend. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was asking them to catch up. That night, after the gathering, I lay in bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. The soft hum of the city was distant, almost reverent, as if it, too, had paused to acknowledge the weight of what had just transpired. My phone buzzed with messages, acquaintances who'd heard whispers, distant cousins now eager to reconnect, a few high school classmates suddenly inspired by my journey. I ignored them all. The victory wasn't for them. It wasn't even for the version of me that had been overlooked all those years. It was for the girl who'd cried quietly in the school bathroom after another parent-teacher night where my brother's mediocrity was celebrated and my awards forgotten. It was for her. I reached for my journal, black leather, the spine cracked from years of confessions, and wrote just 3 words. They saw me, but not as I had once hoped. Not with pride or warmth. No, they saw me the way one sees a storm that was once just a soft breeze. Unstoppable. Unyielding. The next morning, my mother called. Twice. I didn't answer. Her voice on the voicemail was soft, uncertain. We're proud of you, Evelyn. Call me when you can. Proud. That word used to live like a mirage in my chest, always shimmering just out of reach. Now it felt like an afterthought. Something she said because silence would be worse. And still, part of me wanted to believe her. That's the most painful part of family hurt. No matter how high you rise, some part of you still aches for their love to be real. I threw myself into the work ahead. Stepping into the CEO role at Halverson Enterprises wasn't just a title, it was a crucible. The first weeks were a blur of meetings, restructuring plans, and strategy sessions with skeptical board members who hadn't expected someone like me. Young, female, unapologetically assertive. But I had waited long enough to speak. I wasn't about to whisper now. I instituted new leadership protocols, expanded our investment into ethical AI research, and quietly made space for voices like mine, once sidelined, now central. I hired women who reminded me of myself, sharp, underestimated, relentless in their pursuit of more. I didn't just want to build a successful company. I wanted to build a sanctuary for those like me who knew what it was to be overlooked, who grew strong in the shadows. Meanwhile, the family buzz didn't die down. My mother sent care packages to my office, lavender-scented candles, home-baked cookies I hadn't tasted in years. My father mailed me a leather-bound book on leadership with a post-it note stuck to the front. Thought this might help. Dad. They were learning how to reach for me again. But I wasn't the same daughter anymore. Weeks passed. I declined every family dinner invitation. I wasn't being cruel. I was giving them space to reckon with the woman they had never imagined I'd become. Let them learn my worth without me rehearsing it for them at the dinner table. Nathan sent a single email. So, any job openings for a cocky older brother who's finally realizing his kid sister might be smarter than him? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to HR with a note. Please consider for compliance review. Even that felt like grace. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was honoring the journey. There's a difference. Because some victories aren't loud. Some victories are quiet walks through your childhood home where the pictures still show everyone but you until now. Because I had mailed them a new one. Me in front of the Halverson building, its steel and glass towering behind me like a monument to every ignored idea I ever had. No caption. No smile. Just truth. Weeks turned into months, and while winter softened into spring, I watched my world continue to reassemble itself, not with fanfare, but with deliberate quiet. The kind that comes when long-held tensions finally stretch themselves out and take a seat at the table. It started subtly. The family group chat, once a stage for Nathan's updates and accolades, began to shift. Aunt Gloria posted a photo of the Forbes article featuring me on the cover. So proud of our Evelyn, she wrote. The message was met with heart emojis and hesitant congratulations. For years I had been the shadow in every group photo, the one holding the camera or cropped out of the frame. Now my face looked back at them from headlines they couldn't ignore. It was surreal, but not satisfying, because by now I had learned the difference between admiration and amends. One can be printed on magazine covers. The other comes in silence, in stammered apologies, in actions that carry the weight of what wasn't said before. I hadn't been back to my parents' house since the holiday party. Not out of anger, I had simply outgrown the stage where I needed to perform for their affection. I used to shrink myself to fit in their frame. Now I stood outside it entirely. But one day, my assistant knocked gently on my office door. "Miss Hart," she said, "there's someone here to see you. Says she's your mother." I froze. Not because I was angry, but because a part of me, the part that still remembered birthday mornings passed over, or science fair ribbons quietly slipped into drawers, didn't know how to receive her without folding in on myself. I stood. "Send her in." She walked in carefully, her handbag clutched in front of her like a shield. Her coat was too thin for the season. Her hair was still dyed that honey-brown shade she favored, but the roots were showing. "Evelyn," she said, like the name itself tasted unfamiliar. I motioned for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the velvet armchair across from me, glancing around at the sleek office I had carved out of a corner of the 24th floor. Her eyes landed on the photo behind me, flanked by two women I'd recently promoted to VP roles. Women who, like me, had once been underestimated. "I didn't know what to bring," she said softly. "So, I just came." I nodded. "You don't need to bring anything." She hesitated. "That's not true. I should have brought 1,000 things. Apologies. Questions. Better memories." I swallowed, surprised by the honesty in her voice. She continued. "I was so busy loving Nathan the way I thought he needed to be loved. I forgot to learn how you needed to be seen." The words lingered in the air, brittle and tender. I didn't cry. I didn't offer absolution. But I didn't turn away either. I didn't need fanfare, I finally said. I just needed to be allowed to want something different. And to be loved for it. She nodded, her chin trembling. "I see that now," she whispered. "And I'm sorry it took headlines and titles to make me see you." We sat in silence for a while, the city humming below us. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something small. A photograph. Me, age 9, sitting at a school desk grinning next to a homemade science fair project. The cardboard was crooked. The glitter letters spelled future CEO. "You brought this home the day after the fair," she said. We laughed about it. Said it was sweet. I didn't even frame it. She placed it on my desk. "I'd like you to keep it now." I stared at it for a long time. At the girl I once was, bright-eyed and invisible. The girl who had drawn her own blueprints and been told to color inside someone else's lines. Then I smiled, just a little. "I think she finally got what she came for," I said. My mother stood. She didn't reach for a hug. She didn't try to make the moment tidy. She just nodded. "I hope someday we can begin again." And maybe we would. But I had already begun. On my own. And this time, I was writing the frame myself. Weeks after my mother's visit, a letter arrived, handwritten, thick cream paper, my name scrawled in the familiar tilt of someone trying to be careful with their words. It was from Nathan. I held it for days before opening it, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, an ache I couldn't quite name. The ache of finally being seen, yet still not sure if the vision was true or just temporary. I had learned not to lean on others for validation, but Nathan, he was different. Not kinder, not more generous, but closer. Closer to the version of myself that had needed to believe blood meant understanding. When I finally opened the letter, it was just 2 pages. No fanfare. No excuses. Just this. "Evelyn. I don't know how to begin a letter to someone I spent years dismissing, even if I didn't realize it at the time. I've been reading about you, your interviews, your speeches, the articles. You speak with a clarity I never noticed when we were kids. Maybe because I never listened. Maybe because I didn't know how. I grew up thinking success meant noise, applause, headlines, Dad's approval. You lived in the quiet spaces I never thought to look into. While I was winning trophies, you were building foundations. And now those foundations carry the weight of something real, something earned. You didn't need our recognition to build your empire. But I need yours now. Because I realize I wasn't just the favored son, I was the blind one. You deserved more than what we gave you. More than the half-smiles and the hand-me-down affection. I'm sorry I never protected you. Sorry I never stood beside you at those dinners when they changed the subject away from you. I saw it. And I said nothing. That's on me. You once asked me what made me proud. Today, it's you. If you ever want a brother again, I'm here. Nathan. I read the letter 3 times, my fingers tracing the ink where the words pressed harder, as if he needed them to land fully. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to reply. I simply placed it in the drawer beside my bed, where it rested next to my old journal, the one that held every painful silence I'd ever swallowed. It was a beginning, not a resolution. But beginnings are precious in families like ours. I saw Nathan a few weeks later at a conference. He approached with hesitance, a man stripped of his old armor, wearing something more unfamiliar, humility. We talked briefly. No grand apologies, no performative embraces. Just 2 grown adults sharing space. And it was enough. He didn't ask for a job. He didn't try to make himself part of my success. He simply asked, "Are you happy?" And I said yes. Not because everything had been fixed, or every wound stitched with gold, but because I had stopped waiting for their version of love. I had made my own. After the letter from Nathan and that brief, disarming encounter at the conference, I found myself remembering things I had once worked hard to forget. Childhood echoes that lived in the corners of our old house, the creak of the hallway floorboards, the scent of lemon polish before guests arrived, the heavy silence at dinner when I dared to speak too boldly about my dreams. And so, on a rain-heavy Thursday, I drove back to that house. Not to move in, not to forgive, but to witness. The driveway was still lined with the same bricks my father had laid himself the summer I turned 10. He'd made Nathan help, saying it was a man's job. I had offered, eager, curious. He had looked up, sweat on his brow, and said, "Go play, Evelyn. This isn't for you." Funny how some walls are built long before they ever rise from stone. I parked and stared at the house for a long while. The lights were on. I hadn't told them I was coming. This wasn't about them. It was about me and the girl who used to sit by the window with a notepad full of ideas no one wanted to hear. I rang the bell. My father answered. His face changed, not shock, not joy. Something in between. A man trying to catch up to the moment. "Evelyn." "Hi." We stood there, the wind threading between us. "I was in the neighborhood," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. "Come in," he said. I stepped over the threshold, and just like that, the memories poured in. The smell of rosemary from the kitchen. The ticking grandfather clock in the hallway. The wall of family photos still carefully arranged. Nathan's graduation, Nathan's wedding, Nathan's child. And then, near the edge, one I hadn't seen before. Me. At a recent conference. The same photo from the Forbes article. Framed. I turned to him. He followed my gaze. "Your mother put it up last month." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. She entered the room moments later, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened. "I didn't expect." "I know," I said. We sat in the living room. They asked questions this time, about work, about the company, about my life in the city. Not out of obligation. Out of something slower, more real. They listened. Not perfectly, but with effort. At one point, my mother placed her hand over mine. "You always had it in you," she said. I looked down at our hands, hers lined with years, mine with calluses invisible to the eye but forged in silence. "Maybe," I said. "But it would have helped if someone else saw it back then." She nodded. That was the closest we'd get to a confession. And for now it would do. Before I left, I stood at the base of the staircase, the one where I used to sit as a girl, watching the grown-ups laugh and toast and ignore the questions I was too afraid to ask aloud. I walked upstairs. To my old room. It was cleaner than I remembered, like a museum of someone who'd never truly been known. My bookshelf still held my childhood favorites. My desk was bare, save for one item, a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside were sketches. Business plans I'd drawn at 15. Notes I'd written about ideas that would later become the bones of my first startup. My handwriting sharp, dreaming, desperate to be believed. And there, tucked at the bottom, a letter. Unsent. Unstamped. From my mother, dated 5 years ago. Evelyn. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know how to say I'm sorry without sounding like I just want to be forgiven. But I hope you know. I've watched. Quietly. And I've always been proud. Even if I didn't know how to say it when it counted. Come home when you're ready. Or don't. But know the door will be open. Love. Mom. I folded it carefully. And I smiled. Not because the past was healed, but because the present had space for something new. And the girl who used to whisper her worth into that pillow-strewn bed? She had finally spoken loud enough to be heard. Back in the city, the view from my office window seemed different, not the skyline itself, but the way I saw it. Less like a finish line. More like a landscape I'd learned to navigate on my own terms. Halverson Enterprises was thriving. We had just signed a global deal that would expand our AI logistics framework into Europe and Southeast Asia. The board, once cautious, even patronizing, now leaned forward when I spoke, their pens stilling, their eyes watchful. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't need to. I led with precision, clarity, grace forged in fire. But not everyone adjusted as easily. One morning, during a quarterly strategy session, Charles Eldridge, the oldest board member, a man who had once interrupted me mid-sentence to explain my own business model back to me, cleared his throat as I concluded a presentation on ethical automation protocols. Evelyn, he said, fingers steepled, voice patronizingly smooth, your vision is ambitious. But have you considered scaling back a bit? Just to avoid overextension. The room stilled. Eyes flicked to me, waiting. I met his gaze calmly. Charles, if this were 5 years ago, I might have considered playing small to make others comfortable. I clicked the remote. Another slide appeared, a graph. Growth. Efficiency. Reduced overhead. But as you can see, our numbers support not just vision, but velocity. Playing small doesn't serve our shareholders. Or our future. Silence. Then slow, reluctant nods. Afterward, as people filtered out, one of the newer members, Simone Tran, a cybersecurity expert I'd recruited, smiled at me. You don't raise your voice, she said, but you shake the room. I returned the smile. Let them underestimate me. It gives me room to surprise them. That afternoon, as I walked through the executive wing, a receptionist stopped me. Miss Hart, there's someone waiting in your private conference room. Said you'd know what it's about. I frowned. Inside, I found a woman I hadn't seen in a decade. Elaine Rowe had been my college roommate. Once my closest confidant. Until we fractured over a startup we had tried, and failed, to build together. I had moved forward. She had vanished. I heard about your appointment, she said, standing awkwardly. I didn't offer a hug. You came a long way to say hello, I said. I came to apologize, she replied. And to ask if there's room for me in your world again. I studied her. The old part of me wanted to say yes immediately. But the woman I had become, who had built herself from silence and betrayal, knew better than to give access without intention. I don't offer forgiveness in return for regret, I said. But I do believe people grow. She nodded. I'd work my way up again. I just want the chance. I gestured to the chair. Then start by telling me what you've learned since the last time you thought I wasn't enough. And so, we began again, not as friends, not yet, but as women standing at the edge of a past that had almost buried them. That evening, I returned home to a quiet apartment, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony, watching the sun soften against the city's edge. Sometimes, it's not about who hurt you. It's about who you decide to become after they do. And I had decided. No more shrinking. No more waiting for permission. Just light, spread across steel and sky, belonging entirely to me. A month after Elaine's visit, I found myself sorting through the digital archives of Halverson's internal legacy files. A late-night audit of historical decisions, team restructures, and once-ignored proposals from junior staff. It was part of a transparency initiative I'd launched, a promise that no good idea would be buried under dust or ego. And buried I found them. Dozens of ignored pitches from women and minorities. Innovations shelved for being too ambitious. Memos marked with dismissive comments like "revisit later" that had never been revisited. I printed out 10 of the best and brought them to my leadership team the next morning. "These," I said, spreading the papers across the table, "are the ideas we'll fund next." There was silence, then murmurs of agreement. But one voice, Derek, the senior VP of operations, older, always measured, raised a hand. "Respectfully, Evelyn, why resurrect these now?" I looked him square in the eye. "Because I know what it feels like to have your best work ignored." The room shifted. Not defensively, reflectively. They knew I wasn't talking about revenge. I was talking about justice. That afternoon, I made a call to Talia, one of the women whose proposal for a sustainability initiative had been passed over years ago. She'd since moved on, started her own firm, modest but respected. "I'd like to partner with you," I said, "to bring your model to scale with our backing." There was a pause, thick with disbelief. "Why now?" she asked, the edge of caution in her voice. "Because the person in charge finally understands what you were saying all along," I said simply. "And because your work deserves a stage." She said yes. Not because of the offer, but because she could tell it came without strings, without performance, without erasure. That week, I received another unexpected visitor. My father. He arrived at my office with a manila envelope in hand, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying a weight that no longer fit him. "I found this in the attic," he said, placing the envelope on my desk. Inside were my childhood drawings, business plans, mock logos, even hand-drawn org charts. Doodles I'd once proudly shown him, only to have them waved off or discarded. "I thought they were childish," he admitted. "But now, I see. You were always building. I just didn't have the eyes to see what you were building for." He looked older. Not just in body, but in truth. "I can't undo those years, Evelyn. But I can say this now, your work matters." "It always did." I nodded. That was all I needed. Not a rewritten past. Just the truth, spoken plainly. Before he left, he turned at the door. "Your mother wants you to come to dinner. No expectations. Just us." "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. And I did think about it. That night, I placed the drawings in a new folder marked Origins. Because we all come from somewhere. Even when it doesn't recognize us at first. I said yes to the dinner invitation. Not because I needed reconciliation, but because I was curious to see what the house looked like when it wasn't cast in the light of my striving. When the performance was over and all that remained was who we had each become. I arrived early, a small bouquet in hand, not the grand gestures they were once used to, just soft peonies and eucalyptus wrapped in brown paper. Simple. Honest. My mother answered the door. Her smile was tentative, less painted, more human. "You look good," she said. "So do you," I replied. And we both understood the lie, not in appearance, but in assumption. Because neither of us had been good for a long time, only trying. The dining table was set for 3. Candles flickered. The roast chicken smelled like memory. Not the warmth of it, but the ache of holidays where I'd sat at this very table, overlooked. Yet tonight, something was different. They waited for me to sit first. Conversation flowed more slowly. My father asked about the new European partnership. My mother asked how I was sleeping, if the pace of work left room for peace. These were small questions, but they carried weight. They were questions asked of a person they were learning to know, not a placeholder for disappointment. At one point, my father poured wine into my glass and said, "You've built something remarkable." And I responded, Not with sarcasm or salt, but with soft certainty. I had to. There was no defensiveness. Just recognition. Midway through dessert, my mother brought out a small photo album. One I hadn't seen before. "I've been collecting these," she said, flipping it open. Photos from my childhood of me alone. Me painting on the porch. Me setting up my lemonade stand. Me at age 10 holding a young entrepreneur certificate I'd won at school. Photos I didn't know she'd taken. Photos I didn't know she kept. "I didn't always know how to celebrate you," she said. "But I want you to know I saw you. Even when I didn't say it." I ran my fingers over one of the pictures, my face frozen in ambition even then. I had always wanted so badly to be seen. I looked up at her. "Thank you for showing me now." We sat there, 3 people learning to be a family without the script. No performative toasts, no forced pride. Just the tentative truth of 3 hearts trying to meet halfway. As I left, my mother hugged me tighter than she had in years. Not possessively. Not apologetically. Just fully. And my father said, "We'd like to visit your office sometime, if that's all right." "It's more than all right," I said. "It's time." On the drive home, I rolled down the window. The wind tangled in my hair like freedom, and the moon kept pace beside me. I had rewritten the story, not with revenge, but with presence. I didn't need their praise anymore. But I had earned their respect. And that, I had learned, was enough to close a chapter. Or open a new one. A week after that dinner, I stood at the front entrance of Halverson Enterprises waiting for my parents. I had sent a car for them, sleek, black, quiet inside. The kind of ride Nathan had once bragged about taking for client meetings. I wondered if they'd recognize that small choice for what it was. Not opulence, but dignity. They arrived 15 minutes early. My father wore a navy blazer, slightly too formal for a midday visit. My mother had softened her usual perfection with a shawl she used to wrap around me during childhood thunderstorms. The receptionist greeted them by name. They blinked in surprise, as if unaccustomed to being known without an introduction. I led them through the building, past frosted glass meeting rooms and sleek workstations where my team moved with purpose. They smiled at us, nodded, these people who had learned to follow my vision not because I was feared, but because I had listened. "This is your floor?" my mother asked as we stepped out of the elevator. "It's our floor," I corrected gently. "Every one of us earned it." I guided them to the conference room with the city's skyline stretching behind it, endless and unbending. My father paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the plaques on the wall, awards, features, company milestones. "Most of these came in the last 3 years, he noted. I nodded. After I stopped waiting to be given permission. They didn't respond right away. But their silence wasn't heavy. It was reverent. I offered them tea, sat them across from me at the head of the long table. "Why did you invite us today?" my father asked, the question simple but steeped in meaning. "Because I wanted you to see," I said, folding my hands. "Not what I've built, but how far I've come without waiting for you to believe I could." My mother looked down, her hand tightening around her cup. "You don't need our approval," she whispered. "No," I replied. "But I needed to outgrow my longing for it." She looked up then. "And have you?" I smiled. Enough to let it go. It wasn't said with bitterness. Only clarity. My assistant knocked and entered with a small package. I opened it slowly, revealing a framed photograph, the one from my childhood with the glittery future CEO sign. I had commissioned a minimalist plaque beneath it. She already knew. I slid it across the table. "I want this hung in the main hallway," I told them. "It's a reminder, not just for me. For every young woman who walks these halls and doubts herself." My father's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. My mother touched the glass, her eyes wet. "This is your legacy," she said softly. "No," I said. "This is just the beginning." As they left, I walked them to the elevator. My father looked back once, at the wall, the staff, the hum of a place now shaped in my image. "You made this building say your name," he said. "No," I answered. "I made it remember it." And then they were gone, swallowed by the closing doors. I stood there, alone for a moment, watching the reflection of my younger self in the glass, a girl with too many dreams and nowhere to place them. Now the walls carried them all. Success, I've learned, doesn't just echo forward. It ripples backward, into every room you left quietly, into every face that once looked past you. And sometimes, it reaches people you never expected. 3 days after my parents visited the office, I received a message from an old teacher, Mr. Langston, my high school economics instructor. A man who once called Nathan a born leader and encouraged me to consider safe roles with stable futures. Evelyn, I read about your appointment. I'd like to extend an invitation to speak at the school career week. The students would benefit from your perspective. I stared at the screen. In that very classroom, I had once pitched a business plan involving biodegradable packaging for fast food chains. Mr. Langston had chuckled, called it idealistic, and moved on to the next student. I had tucked my notes away after that day, folding that part of myself closed for years. And now he wanted me to inspire the next generation. I said yes, not because I needed the platform, but because there might be one girl in that room who, like I once had, wondered if she could be taken seriously without permission. The gym was packed when I arrived. Students lined the bleachers. Posters of alumni dotted the walls. Nathan's face was on one. Top litigator of the class of 20XX. I laughed softly to myself. Of course. Mr. Langston greeted me at the door, older now, a little more bent, his smile unsure. You've done quite well, he said, clearing his throat. I had help, I replied, watching his face twist in confusion. From the voices that told me I couldn't. They taught me how to work in silence. He nodded slowly, as if realizing the role he had played without ever meaning to. On stage, I told my story, not the polished version, but the real one. About the dreams dismissed, the ideas ignored, the strength built in shadow. And then I paused. If you're sitting here with something burning in your chest, something they've told you is too much, or too weird, or not practical enough, please don't file it away. I held up the childhood sketch of my company's logo. This? I drew it when I was 13. Everyone laughed. But now it's printed on every server rack in 3 countries. There was silence. Then applause. But the girl in the front row with the bitten nails and the composition book, she nodded. Slightly. Like someone who just found the mirror she didn't know she needed. After the event, Mr. Langston approached again. I was wrong about you, he said. I met his eyes. No. You were exactly what I needed you to be. A reminder. That night, I walked through my old neighborhood. Past the bus stop where I used to sketch ideas. Past the library where I hid from arguments I couldn't win at home. Everything was smaller now, but not diminished. Just sized correctly against who I'd become. I stopped in front of the diner where I'd worked through college. Peered through the window. The same counter. The same red stools. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Still, I left a $500 tip and a note. To the one on the late shift, wondering if this is all there is, trust me. It's not. Keep going. Sometimes, the best kind of justice isn't loud. It's quiet generosity. Paid forward. Without needing to be seen. After that school visit, something shifted in me. For so long, my drive had been powered by disproving people, turning their disbelief into fuel. But lately, I found myself moving not to be seen, but to be whole. The noise of needing recognition faded into something quieter, gentler, the sound of honoring myself. Still, power, real power, demands boundaries. And one of the hardest things I had to learn was that not every reunion is worth attending. One evening, I received an invitation. A gala, hosted by Nathan's law firm. He was being honored for excellence in corporate litigation. The envelope was thick, gilded, my name embossed with flourishes. There was a time I would have agonized over it. Spent hours choosing a dress, rehearsing casual lines that hinted at success without sounding boastful. Not this time. I RSVP'd no. Instead, I donated anonymously to a legal aid organization in the firm's name. one that helped women exit toxic partnerships and start businesses of their own. That was my kind of celebration. But Nathan didn't let it rest. He called me the next day. "You really aren't coming?" he asked, tone a cocktail of disbelief and bruised ego. "No," I said simply. "I thought we were rebuilding." "We are," I replied. "But I no longer show up to events where the room expects me to prove I belong." He was quiet. Then he said, "You've changed." I smiled into the receiver. "No, Nathan. I've just stopped hiding." We didn't argue. We didn't hang up angry. He understood, even if it unsettled him. Sometimes, the people who once overshadowed you will never fully accept your light unless you shrink again. And sometimes, you love them enough not to. The week of the gala, I flew to a coastal town in Portugal where my company had recently expanded. I spent the days visiting women-led startups we'd funded, sipping coffee in quiet cafes, walking the beach barefoot under dawn's hush. And there, watching the horizon blur into gold, I wrote myself a letter. Not the kind I used to write to make sense of pain, but the kind that marks a threshold. Dear Evelyn, you don't owe them smallness. You don't need to translate your joy into their language. You've arrived. Not to a destination, but to yourself. Keep choosing the rooms that make your voice ring true. Keep building doors where they once gave you none. You are not someone's afterthought. You are the blueprint. With love. Always you. I sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer of the small and I stayed in, beside the Gideon Bible. A relic of a past belief, and now, a prayer for someone else to find. Not everyone will see the moment your life turns sacred. But you will. And that's enough. Saying no used to terrify me. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had been raised in a world where compliance was mistaken for kindness. Where a woman's worth was measured by her flexibility, how much she could bend without breaking. But power, I've learned, is not in the yes. It's in the clarity of a well-placed no. When I returned from Portugal, my calendar was packed. Meetings with potential partners, product development reviews, press interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the quiet CEO who shocked the system. But the more they wanted of me, the more I felt that old tug, that pull toward accommodation, toward the desire to prove I could do it all. I stopped midweek and took myself to lunch, alone, no phone. Just a pen and a napkin. On it, I wrote one sentence. You do not have to explain your no. That became my mantra. It started with little things. Declining back-to-back meetings that had no clear purpose. Saying no to magazine features that wanted to angle my story through a lens of familial redemption. No, my success wasn't about being forgiven. It was about being reclaimed. Then came the harder no. A merger proposal. It came from a firm headed by one of Nathan's close associates, an aggressive offer promising global expansion at the cost of autonomy. They wanted control of our AI infrastructure, our leadership team, our public narrative. The number was staggering. Enough to tempt most boards. But not mine. And certainly not me. In the boardroom, I laid the proposal flat and looked each member in the eye. This offer sees our value, but not our vision. We're not for sale, not our ethics, not our leadership, not our name. There was murmured agreement, then rising support. The proposal was rejected. The firm's response was cold. Nathan called that night. You know they're furious. I'm not here to soothe egos, I replied. He sighed. You're playing a dangerous game. I laughed. No. I'm writing the rules now. And I meant it. Because the more I said no to things that didn't serve my soul, the more space I had to say yes to what did. I launched a mentorship fund, quietly, without press. A rotating scholarship for young women in tech and design. I met with the first 5 recipients over tea in a small loft space downtown. They were bright-eyed, all questions and ambition. One of them, a girl named Liana, asked, How do you get people to take you seriously? I looked her in the eyes and said, By taking yourself seriously first. They scribbled notes. Hung on every word. But I made sure to tell them this too. You don't have to become invincible. You just have to stop shrinking. Even when it makes them uncomfortable. They nodded. And I saw myself in all of them, before the boardrooms, before the betrayals. Just a girl with fire in her chest and a world trying to pour water over it. And I thought, this is the work that matters. Not the headlines, not the awards, but the echoes. The ones who will rise because you didn't flinch. One afternoon, deep in the rhythm of quarterly forecasts and innovation roadmaps, I received an email that stopped me cold. Subject line: from someone who remembers you. It was from Rosa. In high school, she'd been the custodian's daughter. Quiet, always sketching in the margins of her notebook, forever in oversized sweaters and headphones. We'd shared a bench in the library for years without saying much, but I remembered her eyes, sharp, kind, and always watching. Evelyn. You don't know this, but I used to watch you from across the study tables. You were always working, always drawing out some business plan or idea on napkins and graph paper. Everyone dismissed you, even the teachers. But I didn't. I knew there was something different about the way you carried your silence. Anyway, I saw you on the news last week, and I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. You became everything they said you couldn't. Rosa. I reread the message 5 times. And then I cried. Not because it was sentimental, but because it reminded me of a truth that so often gets buried in our striving. Even in the seasons where we feel invisible, someone is watching. Someone is rooting for us. Someone is quietly cheering, even if we never hear them. I replied, Rosa, I remember you. And I'm so grateful for your message. You saw me before I had anything worth showing. That means more than all the applause I've gotten since. If you're ever in the city, lunch is on me. She never wrote back. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe that moment was enough. Later that week, during a leadership retreat, I asked each department head to share a story, not about their resumes, but about someone who believed in them before they were someone. The room grew still. Vulnerable. One spoke about a grandmother who saved pennies for her school books. Another about a barista who slipped them free coffee during late-night study marathons. Small stories. Monumental impact. I shared about Rosa. She never said a word to me in school, I said, voice steady. But she saw me. Sometimes, that's all we need. To be witnessed. Even in our most invisible moments. It became a tradition. At every annual summit, we shared the names of our silent believers. Wrote them on a wall in the main hall, not as heroes, but as co-authors of our becoming. Because none of us rise alone. That evening, I walked through the quiet halls of our office. The city glittered outside like a dream too loud to whisper. And on that wall, I wrote 2 names. Rosa, who saw me. My younger self, who kept going anyway. Then I signed my name beneath them. Because some stories deserve to be spoken. Even the ones no one else clapped for. Especially those.